Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The champagne was warm, the shrimp was rubbery, and the playlist was some lazy mix of old Coldplay and acoustic Ed Sheeran covers, all of it exactly the kind of over-polished, underwhelming perfection my sister, Emily, lived for. The backyard was decked out in gold and cream, fairy lights strung like spider webs across the patio, casting just enough of a romantic glow to make people forget they were surrounded by lies. I was standing by the hedges, nursing my drink and my silence, watching my mom flutter around the guests like the damn queen bee at her own coronation. And in a way, she was. This wasn't just Emily's engagement party. This was Catherine's masterstroke. Her beautiful daughter was finally settling down with a wealthy, clean-cut finance guy named Mark, and she was ready to show off. Not just Emily, but herself. Like she'd raised a prize-winning animal. I'd arrived 15 minutes late, deliberately. No one noticed. No one ever did. Except Catherine, who caught me in the act of existing and raised one eyebrow like she'd smelled something off. She didn't hug me. Just that classic smile and pivot maneuver she'd mastered over the years, the one that made you feel like maybe she'd greet the mailman with more affection. By the time the speeches began, I was already checked out. They set up a mic stand by the pool, with all the guests clustered in semicircles on white rented chairs. Emily stood center stage, glowing in her off-white dress, not bridal, but close enough to foreshadow the coming storm. Mark stood beside her, looking dazed and happy, the way rich guys often look when they think they've made a good investment. Catherine stepped forward, lifting her champagne flute with the same energy you'd use to conduct an orchestra. The room, or rather, the garden, fell into a reverent hush. She cleared her throat and began. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate our Emily and her wonderful fiancé, Mark, she said, with that clipped, perfect enunciation that made everything sound like it was being read off a cue card. Emily has always been a light in our family. Smart, kind, driven. She was never afraid to chase what she wanted. And she always made us proud. People clapped. Someone whistled. Emily beamed and leaned into Mark, who squeezed her hand. Then Catherine kept going. And of course, as a mother, you want all your children to succeed. You pray for them, you hope for the best. But sometimes, well, she let the sentence trail off. There was a pause. I felt my stomach drop half an inch. Sometimes they take a different path, she continued, her eyes cutting sideways toward me. Some paths lead to big cities and bright futures. And some lead nowhere. A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the crowd. Emily's mouth twitched, like she wasn't sure whether to intervene or enjoy the show. Catherine smiled wider. Let's just say not all of us live up to our potential. But that's okay. We can't all be stars. Some of us are just background. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. I didn't move. I just sipped my drink and stared at her. It wasn't the first time she'd done this, but it was the first time she'd done it with a microphone and 50 guests to bear witness. And yet, she said, raising her glass again, we are family. We support each other, even when some of us make disappointing choices, because that's what family does. More silence. Emily looked down at her shoes. Mark, bless his oblivious heart, smiled and clapped like he'd just heard a Hallmark speech. My cousin Sam mouthed, Jesus, from across the lawn. And that's when I smiled. Because that's when I knew it was time. I walked toward the Bluetooth speaker they'd been using for music. Pulled out my phone. I didn't need to say a word. I just tapped the screen, found the file, and pressed play. It began with laughter. My mom's voice. High-pitched, fake, the kind of laugh she used when she thought no one was listening. Oh my God, if I have to pretend Daniel is doing so well one more time, I swear, she said. He still teaches high school history, Emily. In Harrisburg. He drives a 15-year-old Honda. Then Emily's voice chimed in, smug and unbothered. He's basically a glorified babysitter. But hey, He gets summers off, right? Laughter. From both of them. The kind that made you feel cold, no matter how hot the night air was. Then Catherine again. I just tell people he's focusing on giving back. Makes us look charitable. Meanwhile, I'm covering half his bills because he forgot to renew his insurance again. More laughter. Then the real gut punch. You know what he really is, Em? He's useful. He feels guilty. He still wants our approval so bad it's pathetic. I can make him show up for anything with the right mix of guilt and silence. The recording played on. More barbs. More poison. A few chuckles from Emily about how she could get me to do anything with a fake crisis. Something about lying to Mark about her job. Something about how Dan always cleans up the mess. And then it ended. Just like that. No big finish. Just silence. The guests sat frozen. A few people looked at their shoes. One guy from Mark's side shook his head like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Catherine's face had gone pale, then red, then blank, her social mask short-circuiting in real time. I tucked the phone back into my pocket, smiled again, and said calmly, "Thanks for the toast, Mom. I figured you might want to hear what you sound like when you think no one's listening." Then I walked back to the bar. Let the perfect party burn. There are certain memories that stick with you not because they were traumatic or dramatic, but because they were small and constant, like a dripping faucet in the background of your life. Too steady to scream, but too sharp to ignore. I was probably 6 the first time I realized I was not the child my mother had hoped for, and definitely not the one she bragged about. That honor belonged to Emily from the moment she came into this world, quiet, pretty, coordinated, a natural performer. She walked early, talked in full sentences before her 2nd birthday, and somehow managed to master the art of impressing adults with wide eyes and mimicked interest. I, on the other hand, was the clumsy one, the loud one, the boy who couldn't sit still, who constantly forgot to close the fridge door or tie his shoes the right way. Teachers started calling home by 1st grade. They said I had focus issues, that I was bright but distracted, clever but disruptive. Catherine would nod her way through those phone calls like a disappointed manager fielding complaints about an underperforming employee. She never asked me what was wrong. She never wondered if maybe something in my head just worked differently. She just sighed louder with every report card and told my father, James, that I was turning out like his brother, which, in her eyes, was just above being a stray dog. Emily, meanwhile, brought home glitter-covered posters and straight A's, and even when I helped her write an essay about Abraham Lincoln in the 4th grade, something I still remember doing word for word, the praise at dinner was all hers. There was a night I got into a fight at school because some kid called me stupid. I didn't throw the first punch, but I definitely threw the second, and it landed hard enough to earn me a call home and a 3-day suspension. When Catherine picked me up from the principal's office, she didn't ask why I did it. She just looked at me and said, "Emily would never get into a fight. She uses her words. Maybe try that next time." She didn't even ask what the other kid had said to me. That was when I started realizing I wasn't just failing to impress her, I was actively disappointing her by existing the way I did. Fast forward a few years and Emily had become not only the favored child, but something closer to an extension of Catherine herself. She wore the dresses our mother picked out for her, entered the spelling bees she was pushed toward, and smiled for every camera like her future was waiting just off frame. And she learned early how to use that smile like a weapon. Emily figured out the game long before I even understood there were rules. She learned when to play dumb, when to cry, when to apologize just enough to get out of trouble. One Christmas, when I was about 10 and she was 8, she broke a snow globe that had belonged to our grandmother. Without missing a beat, she gasped and said, "Daniel was throwing a ball inside the house." I hadn't even been home. Catherine grounded me for a week and made me write an apology letter to the ghost of Grandma Ruth. That's when it started to shift inside me, not just anger or sadness, but something heavier, a kind of slow-cooking bitterness. I began to see how things worked in our family, how stories got told and retold until they hardened into facts. Catherine didn't want the truth. She wanted a version of reality that fit her image of motherhood, one where she raised a shining star and a cautionary tale. And look, I know what this sounds like. I'm not here to say I was some perfect son, some tragic misunderstood boy genius. I messed up. I had a temper. I forgot assignments. I zoned out during family dinners and sometimes lashed out at people who didn't deserve it. But none of that seemed to matter as much as the simple fact that I wasn't Emily. That I couldn't pretend. That I wouldn't kiss up or fake a smile just to get a pat on the head. By middle school, it wasn't even subtle anymore. Catherine would say things in front of other parents like, "Emily's our little achiever," and then, when someone asked what I was into, she'd wave a hand and go, "Oh, Daniel's still figuring himself out." Still figuring himself out, like I was some half-formed idea or a work in progress she regretted starting. And it hurt. It really did. But it also taught me something dangerous, something I didn't understand until years later. It taught me that love in our family came with terms. It taught me that if you didn't play the game, you didn't get to sit at the table. And for a long time, I tried anyway. I tried to be good. I tried to get her to notice me for who I was, not just who I wasn't. Which brings me to a question I want to ask you, not as a narrator, but as someone who's lived this. Have you ever felt like your own parent quietly rooted against you? Like you were just a prop in their golden child story? Comment below, I really want to hear your version of this. Because if you've ever sat across the table from someone who shares your blood but not your truth, then maybe you'll understand why I smiled at that party. Maybe you'll understand why I hit play on that voicemail. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was something more primal than that. It was finally being heard. Even if it was too late. Even if no one clapped afterward. And it all started with being the wrong son in the right house. I was 13 when I picked up my uncle's old acoustic guitar and strummed my first broken, buzzing chord in the basement. It sounded like hell, but it felt like freedom, the kind that comes with making noise no one asked for. Music wasn't something anyone in our family paid attention to unless it played softly in the background during dinner parties or holiday gatherings, but for me, it was the first thing that ever gave shape to how I felt. So when I scraped together enough money from mowing lawns and tutoring younger kids to buy a secondhand electric guitar from a pawn shop downtown, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found my thing. I started a garage band with a few kids from school. We were loud, inconsistent, and full of attitude, but it was ours. We called ourselves the Unreliables, which, in retrospect, might have been a little too on the nose. The first time we practiced at our house, Catherine came downstairs halfway through our version of Smells Like Teen Spirit and stood in the doorway with that look, the one that always made me feel like I'd spilled something on the rug she cared more about than me. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She just said, "So this is the new phase now?" In that slow, cutting tone, like she was disappointed I hadn't picked a more respectable form of rebellion. Then she looked at Emily, who was sitting at the kitchen table highlighting flashcards for something she already knew by heart, and said, "At least one of you is taking things seriously." That was the quiet knife, the one she always used. The comparisons were never direct insults. They were just constant reminders that I was the benchmark for mediocrity in our home, and Emily, by contrast, was the gold standard. Even when I did well, it was always in spite of something, in spite of being distracted, in spite of being difficult, in spite of that phase I was in. But when Emily did something right, it was proof of her character. I remember one specific afternoon during my sophomore year. Emily, the golden girl herself, got caught cheating on a chemistry test. Not just cheating, full-blown copying answers from a hidden note card in her pencil case. Her teacher called our house that night, said they were considering giving her a 0 and notifying the academic board. I wasn't even home when the call came in, but the next day, Catherine cornered me in the hallway and said, "You need to stop distracting your sister when she studies. She's under enough pressure without your noise and drama." That was it. No mention of her cheating. No consequences for Emily. Just another twisted rerouting of blame toward the disruption in the family. Me. And my dad? James? He just stood in the corner, sipping lukewarm coffee and mumbling, "That's just how your mom is," like it was some kind of universal truth, like saying it enough times made it an acceptable reason for her emotional sabotage. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He was just absent in the most painful way, physically present, but mentally checked out, like a man watching a train derail from behind a window, saying, "Well, what can you do?" So when I got accepted into Penn State, not a safety school, not a handout, but a real accomplishment I clawed my way toward, I printed the letter and put it on the fridge. I waited. For a day. Then 2. Catherine walked past it 3 times and said nothing. On the 3rd day, she finally glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but Emily's going to NYU. Did you know how hard that school is to get into?" Yeah, I knew. I also knew she had been up late for weeks emailing contacts, including a private counselor Emily suddenly started seeing during her senior year. One night, while looking for an old file on the family computer, I stumbled onto something that stopped me cold. An email draft written from a fake Gmail address sent to an NYU admissions officer. The name on the email signature was Susan Linwood, college advisor, Northbridge Academy, which was neither Emily's school nor a person that existed. But the email was perfectly tailored to paint Emily as a standout applicant with exceptional leadership skills, a deep passion for brand marketing, and a powerful personal story of overcoming family hardship. It even mentioned an unstable home environment with a sibling who suffers from untreated behavioral issues. That sibling, of course, was me. She had written it. Catherine. The grammar, the phrasing, even the little double space after every period, all of it was her. I sat there staring at the screen for 10 full minutes, unable to move. I didn't even copy the file. I just stared at it, absorbing what it meant. She hadn't just chosen Emily. She'd rewritten reality to suit her. She'd invented a more convenient version of our family history, one where I was the problem, and she was the heroic mother guiding her gifted daughter through chaos. I never brought it up. Never confronted her. What was the point? If I'd shown her, she would have called it a joke or accused me of snooping or said, "You know how much I've done for both of you," like that somehow justified everything. That was the rhythm in our house: silence, denial, and subtle attacks wrapped in smiles. It was around then I stopped asking for their attention. Stopped trying to prove anything. I poured myself into my music, my books, and, later, my students. I became someone who helped other kids navigate the mess of adolescence that I never got help with. And all the while, Emily climbed higher, stepping over the facts like cracks in a sidewalk. But here's the thing no one tells you: quiet comparisons can do more damage than loud ones. When you grow up always being the butt to someone else's brilliant, you start building yourself out of contradictions. You try to become small enough not to be noticed, but useful enough not to be discarded. That's how I became invisible. That's how Emily became the star. And that's how my mother crafted a story she could live with even if it wasn't true. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with being ignored for long enough, like background static becoming part of the soundtrack to your life. By the time I hit 30, I had stopped waiting for the phone calls, the congratulations, the motherly pride that never came, and instead leaned fully into the small, quiet life I had built for myself. Not perfect, but real. I taught high school history in a public school where half the kids had more trauma than textbooks, where lessons were interrupted by fire alarms or fights in the hallway. And where some days the only thing I accomplished was getting a student to stop calling themselves worthless. And I loved it. Not in the saintly, look at me saving the world kind of way, but in the way that made me feel like I mattered somewhere, even if that place wasn't in my own damn family. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment over a laundromat with thin walls and a cranky radiator. I didn't have a Tesla or a second house or a curated Instagram feed. I had stacks of old books, a battered guitar in the corner, and a fridge filled with too many condiments and not enough meals. But it was mine. It was honest. And not once did Catherine ever visit. Not once did she say, "Hey, show me what you've made of yourself." Because to her, if there wasn't a photo op or a brag-worthy headline, it didn't count. Meanwhile, Emily moved to Los Angeles and painted a picture of her life so polished, so surgically crafted, it would have made a politician jealous. According to Facebook, LinkedIn, and the carefully filtered photos she fed the world, she was working in digital marketing for luxury lifestyle brands, going to rooftop events, collaborating with influencers, and living in a trendy West Hollywood apartment with white furniture and a balcony view. According to reality, the kind that arrived in the form of whispered phone calls and late-night tears, she was living with a much older man who paid the rent, selling unregulated wellness supplements through a shady pyramid scheme, and spiraling through anxiety and burnout like a broken Ferris while no one knew how to stop. She called me once, completely out of the blue, after 2 years of silence. I still remember the way she sounded on the other end of the line, not polished, not perfect, just small. She said she didn't know who else to talk to. She said everything felt fake, like she'd built a whole life on quicksand. She cried, the kind of crying you don't do unless you're really unraveling, and for a few minutes, all the bitterness between us fell away. She told me she hated the man she was living with but didn't know how to leave without losing everything. She said she couldn't talk to Mom, that Mom would either blame her or worse, tell her to fix her makeup and pretend everything was fine. So I did what any brother would do, or at least any brother who still had something in him to offer. I flew out there, took time off work, dipped into my savings, and stayed on her couch while she figured herself out. I helped her write a new resume, connected her with a friend from college who worked at a nonprofit, and even drove her to interviews. For 2 weeks, we had something that felt almost like a sibling relationship, raw, real, and fragile. She talked about being scared of turning 30 and realizing she didn't know who she really was. I talked about the years she'd disappeared from my life and how much that had hurt. We didn't fix everything, but we sat in the same room and told the truth for once, and that counted for something. But then she went back. Not just to the man, but to the story. The filtered life. The lies that looked better in family group chats. 2 months later, Catherine was showing off a photo of Emily in a silk blazer and heels at some rooftop event and saying, "That's my girl." Self-made and fearless. When I gently asked if Emily had mentioned the job interviews or the man she'd been trying to leave, Catherine narrowed her eyes like I was attacking her pride. "She's fine, Daniel," she said. "She doesn't need saving. Don't make everything about your sad little guilt complex." That was the moment I realized Emily had erased what happened. Not out of malice, but because the truth didn't fit the story. Because admitting that her life had cracks meant admitting that mine maybe wasn't so pathetic after all. And Catherine? She clung to the illusion because it validated her motherhood, the kind that looked better on paper than it ever felt in person. There are photos in our family albums where we all look happy: birthdays, graduations, holidays with coordinated outfits and forced smiles. But what they don't show is the rot underneath. They don't show the loneliness, the comparisons, the silent bruises of being the support beam for someone else's show. No one sees the 2 a.m. phone call when your sister admits she doesn't even like the person she's become. No one hears the voicemail where your mother mocks you for still caring. So yeah, I kept quiet. I let them believe what they needed to. I watched from the sidelines while Emily rebuilt her life on the same shaky scaffolding, hoping no one noticed the cracks. But I remembered. And when that party came, when Catherine stood there in her pastel dress and called me a disgrace in front of everyone, I remembered exactly what she and Emily had once confessed behind closed doors. And I made damn sure they heard it, too. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, one of those long, gray days that make everything feel heavier than it already is, the kind of day where even the birds sound like they're complaining. I'd just finished grading a stack of history essays, most of them barely legible, and was heading home from school when my phone buzzed with a missed call and a new voicemail notification. It was from my mother, which already made my stomach turn in that familiar, slow way. Not fear exactly, but the anticipation of being quietly disappointed before you even pressed play. I didn't call her back right away. I figured it was another passive-aggressive reminder about the upcoming engagement party, or maybe one of those bizarre, vaguely manipulative messages where she asked why I never make time for family anymore. As if that guilt had an expiration date she was legally required to renew. Instead, what I heard wasn't a message at all, not in the traditional sense. It was a recording, clearly unintentional, captured after she thought she'd hung up, but hadn't. 10 minutes and 17 seconds of pure, unfiltered conversation between her and Emily, like I'd been handed a backstage pass to the real show, the version of them that didn't need to smile for the camera or pretend I was one of them. I remember standing in the parking lot with the car door half open, keys dangling from my fingers, as their voices filled my ears with the kind of honesty they'd never had the courage to deliver to my face. It started with laughter, light, plastic, and cruel in the way only practiced contempt can be. Catherine was mid-sentence, clearly unaware the phone was still connected. I swear, if I have to pretend Daniel is doing so well one more time, I'm going to choke, she said, and I swear to God, I could hear her swirling a glass of wine while she said it. Emily chimed in, her voice sharper than I remembered, slightly nasal with amusement. Oh my God, right? He teaches 9th grade. In a town no one's heard of. What are we supposed to say? Congratulations on being a glorified babysitter. More laughter. Not forced. Not ironic. Real. They were enjoying themselves, carving into me with the kind of precision only family can manage. Then Catherine said something that hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. He still drives that ancient Honda, right? I don't know why he doesn't just sell that thing for parts and take the bus. Honestly, I think he likes being pathetic. It's his thing now. Emily giggled again. Maybe he's doing performance art, like the struggle of the suburban male. God, imagine if he brought a date to the party. She'd think it was an intervention. And then, the part that changed everything. Catherine, laughing softly, almost whispering, but still perfectly clear. Dan's just useful for guilt. That's the only reason I invite him to things. He still wants our love so badly, it's almost funny. All I have to do is be quiet for a week and he comes crawling back, trying to impress us. It's like emotional muscle memory, poke the bruise, and he performs. I don't remember getting into the car. I don't remember starting the engine or pulling out of the parking lot. I just remember driving with that recording on a loop, hearing it over and over until the words stopped sounding like English and became something deeper, not just an insult, but an obituary for the illusion I'd been clinging to for years. I had spent so long trying to earn their respect, to build something they might one day look at and say, "You turned out all right after all." And here they were, casually ripping me to shreds over Chardonnay, like it was just another Wednesday. But in a strange way, there was something freeing about it, like watching a house burn that you've already moved out of. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry, not in the immediate, fiery kind of way. I felt cold, clear, like someone had finally snapped their fingers and broken the trance. When I got home, I saved the voicemail to 3 different folders: my phone, my laptop, and a flash drive. Not because I thought they'd deny it, though I knew they probably would, but because I needed the evidence. Not for them. For me. Proof that I hadn't imagined it. That I wasn't overreacting. That the years of being dismissed, belittled, quietly mocked behind fake smiles, it wasn't in my head. I played the message once more that night, sitting in the dark with a beer in one hand and my phone in the other. This time, I listened differently. Not like a wounded son. More like a detective. Cataloging every pause, every fake laugh, every passive insult passed between 2 women who had built their bond, at least partially, on making me the family joke. And I knew right then what I was going to do. Not out of revenge. Not even to expose them, really. But because I was done being the one who carried the weight of pretending. I was done playing the role they'd written for me, the sad, confused brother clinging to scraps of affection from people who didn't actually like me, much less love me. I was going to let them speak for themselves. I was going to take that recording, and when the moment was right, I was going to make sure they heard it the way I had, not as a mistake, but as a mirror. Because some truths don't need to be shouted. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is letting people hear their own voices played back to them, raw, unfiltered, and impossible to deny. And so I waited. 2 weeks. Just long enough for the party to feel safe again. For them to get comfortable. For Catherine to raise her glass and deliver her performance. And when she did, I'd be ready. There's a particular kind of dread that creeps in when you know exactly how a performance will end, but you still have to sit through the entire show. That was how it felt standing beneath the glittering canopy of fairy lights in my mother's pristine backyard, watching her glide between white linen tables and professionally arranged flower bouquets like she was hosting a segment on daytime television called How to Celebrate Your Daughter's Engagement and Pretend Your Son Doesn't Exist. Every detail had been handpicked to look effortless, the catering, the champagne flutes, the string quartet plucking away softly in the corner, and yet every moment felt like I was slowly drowning in someone else's fantasy. Not one designed for me, of course, but one carefully orchestrated to remind me just how far outside the frame I really was. Guests smiled as they sipped their overpriced cocktails, making small talk about real estate, baby names, and mutual fund returns, while Emily basked in the spotlight like a pageant queen returning home from the circuit. She wore a pale pink dress that shimmered ever so slightly in the light, her makeup perfect, her smile even more so, and she floated through the crowd with the calculated charm of someone who knew exactly how much was riding on this illusion. If you didn't know better, you'd think she had it all figured out. And maybe that's what made it sting. The fact that everyone bought the version of her that had never quite matched the one I'd seen crumble just months before. Catherine, of course, hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to me since I arrived. A tight nod, maybe a half-hearted "oh, you made it," as if I had wandered in from the street and was now just politely tolerated. She hadn't introduced me to a single person. She barely acknowledged me when I helped set up the folding chairs earlier that afternoon. To the outside world, I was another body, another placeholder in the family tableau, one that didn't quite match the color scheme. But I wasn't there to make her proud. I was there to return the favor. The sky had just begun to darken to that perfect Instagram-worthy lavender, casting a warm glow across the patio as the final speeches were about to begin. Catherine tapped her flute gently with a dessert fork, the sharp ting-ting-ting cutting through the hum of conversation like a starting bell. The guests turned, smiling, dutifully falling silent as she stepped toward the microphone with the poise of a woman about to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth and practiced like she'd been rehearsing this in her bathroom mirror for weeks. "We are so thrilled to celebrate the love between our beautiful daughter Emily and her wonderful fiancé Mark. It means the world to see so many familiar faces gathered here under one roof. Well, under one tent." She chuckled gently, and the crowd chuckled back, obediently. Emily stood beside her, eyes glistening, nodding with just enough humility to look relatable, but not enough to dim her spotlight. Mark, as always, looked like he had no idea what was truly going on. Catherine continued, "Family is everything to me. Truly, everything. And I've always believed that what defines a family is not just blood, but the strength of character, the choices we make, and the lives we build. Some of us," she said, pausing for dramatic effect, "reach for the stars. Some of us step up. And some of us, well, stay behind." A few polite laughs from the back. A couple of raised eyebrows. She didn't stop. Not every child turns out the way you dream they might. Some of them choose smaller lives. Safe lives. They settle. They disappoint. But still, we love them, don't we? Even if they teach high school in the same town they were born in. Even if they never quite figured it out. And there it was, the open slap, dressed up as a joke, delivered with a smile to a crowd who didn't know whether to laugh or cringe. A few heads turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I just looked her in the eyes and smiled. A real one this time. Because it was finally time. I walked over to the Bluetooth speaker, the one they'd been using to play Norah Jones and smooth jazz all evening. I tapped the screen of my phone, found the file, and said loud enough for the front rows to hear, "Thank you, Mom. I actually brought something too." Then I hit play. At first, the sound was faint, my mother's voice, unmistakably hers, mid-laugh. I swear, if I have to pretend Daniel is doing so well one more time, I'm going to choke. The laughter from the recording filled the air, louder than the actual guests now sitting in stunned silence. Her voice again, sharp, crisp, and clear enough to cut through bone. "Dan's just useful for guilt. He still wants our love so badly, it's almost funny." I let the whole thing play. Every word, every insult, every quiet dig and cruel chuckle from both Catherine and Emily. It played like a confessional, a behind-the-curtain glimpse of everything they'd never say out loud, but had always acted out in one way or another. When it ended, I didn't say a word. The silence in the garden was deafening. Catherine's face had gone white. Emily's mouth hung slightly open, frozen in a half-formed expression that couldn't quite decide between horror and disbelief. Mark stepped slightly away from her, as if instinctively. Aunt Melissa put her drink down. Someone near the buffet muttered, "Jesus Christ." I stepped back from the speaker, looked around at the stunned faces, and said, "It's always nice to hear what people really think of you. Especially at a celebration about honesty, right?" Then I walked back to my seat, picked up my untouched glass of champagne, and took the longest, slowest sip of my life. There were no more speeches after that. For a moment after the voicemail ended, the air around us felt painfully still, like the entire party had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. You could almost hear the mental rewrites playing out in people's heads as they tried to make sense of what they'd just heard. The kind of uncomfortable silence that grips a room when someone breaks the rules of polite society and says the thing everyone was too afraid to even whisper. I stood there, drink in hand, watching my mother try to rearrange her face into something other than panic, but she couldn't quite find the right muscles to fake charm anymore. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then curved into a bizarre, trembling half-smile that looked more like a grimace than anything resembling grace. She cleared her throat and gave a little shrug, trying for levity, trying to put the spell back together, as if the performance might resume if she just tapped her heels and wished hard enough. "Well," she said, her voice just a little too high, "guess the tech gods have a strange sense of humor tonight." A few weak chuckles scattered through the crowd like nervous coughs, but no one was laughing. Not really. Not genuinely. Because they'd all heard it. They'd heard her words, unfiltered and ugly, delivered not in a moment of anger, but in casual cruelty, like slicing someone open just to check if they still bleed. Emily, meanwhile, looked like her entire world had been yanked out from under her. She kept glancing at Mark as if begging him to say something, to take her hand, to reaffirm whatever fantasy they'd built together, but Mark wasn't playing along anymore. His smile was gone. His body had stiffened, his arms crossed tightly in front of him, and his eyes, the same wide, trusting eyes I'd seen from the start, had turned sharp with realization. "You said you never talked like that about me," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, and Emily's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She looked like someone caught mid-theft, fingers still in the drawer, stunned by the sudden spotlight. "Was that supposed to be funny?" he added, his voice quieter now, but far more cutting. "Because you sounded like someone I don't even recognize." She reached for him, whispered something I couldn't make out, but he took a step back, and that was enough. Catherine's perfect little illusion was crumbling in real time, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being embarrassed in front of company. I could have stayed longer. I could have let them try to salvage the moment, scrambled to patch up their reputations and rewrite the story before dessert was served. But I'd done what I came to do. I finished my champagne, set the glass down on the edge of a planter, and walked toward the back gate without looking back. The silence followed me, but so did the sound of footsteps, soft at first, then louder. I turned slightly, expecting maybe a scolding, maybe even another insult hurled my way, but what I saw was something I never expected. Guests. Actual people from the party trailing behind me, like they needed to say something before I disappeared into the night. A woman I barely recognized, a friend of Catherine's from her book club, I think, caught up to me first. She touched my arm gently, her eyes a little watery. "I just want to say, I never knew," she said, her voice tight. "But I always sensed something was off. You deserve better, Daniel." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, because the knot in my throat was made of more than just years of neglect. It was also full of disbelief that someone finally saw it, even just a piece of it. Then came my cousin Sam, the only other person in the family who'd ever hinted that he saw how I was treated, but who never pushed too hard or asked too much. He pulled me into a brief, one-armed hug, the kind men give when they're not sure how much affection they're allowed to show. "That was brutal, man," he said, shaking his head. "But it needed to be said. I think a lot of us needed to hear it." One by one, a few others followed, saying small, quiet things, not sweeping declarations of loyalty or dramatic confessions, just honest acknowledgments that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been imagining it all those years. And for once, I wasn't shrinking under their eyes. I wasn't the mess-up, the disappointment, the background noise in Emily's highlight reel. I was just me, standing there, finally seen. I was halfway to my car when I heard a voice behind me that stopped me cold. "Daniel." It was my father, James. He looked older than I remembered, like the years had finally caught up with him all at once, the soft kind of old, not just in the lines on his face, but in the heaviness of his posture. He walked slowly, deliberately, like a man dragging behind him something heavier than regret. "I should have protected you more," he said, no preamble, no excuses. Just that. 7 words that hit harder than the voicemail. He didn't say it like a defense or an apology wrapped in justification. He said it like a man who had finally looked his own cowardice in the face and didn't like what he saw. "I saw it, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "How she treated you. How she made you feel small. I told myself it was just her way. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But that was a lie. It was always my place. I was your father." I nodded, not sure what to say, because hearing him say it out loud was like watching a door creak open that had been sealed shut for decades. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was finally just naming the wound. "I don't expect anything from you," he added after a moment. "I just needed to say it, before it's too late." Then he turned and walked away, back toward the house that had never felt like mine. I sat in the car for a long time after that, the voicemail still saved on my phone, untouched, unchanged. I didn't need to listen to it again. I already knew every word by heart, but the sound that lingered even louder than their laughter, even longer than their insults, was that final admission from the man who had once stood silent, the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. And maybe that's what healing sounds like. Not victory, not revenge, just truth, finally spoken. Even if it came too late. The next morning started like most others, with the sun crawling through the cheap blinds in my bedroom and the smell of burnt toast wafting from the neighbor's unit downstairs, but it took less than 2 minutes for the illusion of peace to shatter. My phone, still on silent from the night before, had exploded with messages, missed calls, texts, and one particularly long essay from Catherine in the family group chat that read less like an apology and more like a polished PR statement meant to salvage what little control she still thought she had over the narrative. It was theatrical in all the predictable ways, carefully worded and dripping with performative grief, designed to sound reasonable to anyone reading it cold, a script built for damage control. Last night was deeply upsetting for all of us, she wrote, beginning as if she hadn't been the one holding the knife. While I'm heartbroken over how things unfolded, I refuse to let one person's bitterness destroy the joy of Emily's engagement celebration. Daniel's decision to hijack a family moment and play a private recording, one obtained without consent, was manipulative, hurtful, and frankly, disturbing. We all have disagreements. We all say things we don't mean. But airing dirty laundry in front of friends and extended family shows a level of vindictiveness that I won't tolerate. I am disappointed. Deeply. She ended it with a classic Catherine flourish. I wish him healing, but I will not participate in this toxic narrative any further. And just like that, I was cast neatly and irrevocably as the unstable one. The troublemaker. The vengeful black sheep who spoiled a beautiful day out of resentment and envy. Not once did she mention what she had actually said on that voicemail. Not once did she address the laughter, the mocking, the deeply intentional cruelty she'd poured into that phone call when she thought no one was listening. Because, of course, the offense wasn't what she did. The offense was that I exposed it. About 10 minutes later, Emily messaged me directly, short and sharp and filled with the kind of fury that doesn't come from betrayal, but from the sudden collapse of an illusion she thought she had complete control over. You didn't have to do that, she wrote. You ruined my life. There was no hello, no lead-in, no attempt at empathy or explanation. Just that. As if I had walked into the middle of a perfectly staged performance and torn down the backdrop while the audience was still clapping. I stared at the message for a long time before typing out a reply. I didn't yell. I didn't insult. I didn't ask why the truth was somehow less forgivable than the lie. I just wrote, no. I just stopped letting you pretend. I sent it without a second draft. No dots appeared after that. No typing bubble. No follow-up. Just a vacuum, the kind that usually comes right after a bomb's gone off, and the dust is still hanging thick in the air, not quite ready to settle. I spent the rest of the day moving slowly, like the weight of everything that had happened finally decided to plant itself in my chest. I made coffee I barely drank, stared out the window at the same street I'd lived on for nearly a decade, and wondered, not with regret, but with genuine uncertainty, if I had just burned the last fragile bridge I had back to that part of my life. Not just to my mother and Emily, but to the version of me that still believed something there was worth saving. There's a kind of silence that feels louder than screaming, and that's what I was sitting in by the time evening fell, a silence not of peace, but of realization. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. Not just because of what I'd played on that speaker, but because I had let them see that I still cared enough to want them to hear it. I had shown them that even after all the years of being ignored, sidelined, diminished, and dismissed, I still wanted to be understood, and maybe that was the most humiliating part of all. I sat on my couch as the sun dipped behind the buildings, the room dimming slowly around me, and I found myself asking a question I couldn't quite answer. Was I right to do it? Was I right to break the spell? To rip the mask off in public, to force everyone to hear what had always been whispered in corners and disguised with polite smiles? Or had I just become exactly what they'd accused me of being: bitter, attention-seeking, vindictive, unable to let go of old wounds? I thought about Emily's voice on that recording, laughing about my car, about my life, about my existence as a punchline. I thought about Catherine's icy dismissal, her practiced contempt, her ability to rewrite reality mid-sentence if it better suited her self-image. I thought about all the times I'd shown up despite it all: the birthdays, the holidays, the emergencies that turned out not to be emergencies, because some part of me still believed that showing up might eventually be enough. And then I thought about that moment, just before I played the voicemail, when I stood under the string lights, holding my phone like a match, knowing exactly what it would set on fire. The funny thing is, I didn't play that voicemail for revenge. I played it because I needed someone, anyone, to finally hear me. Even if it meant they'd never look at me the same again. Even if it meant they'd never look at me at all. And maybe that's the real cost of truth, not the relationships it ends, but the illusion it kills. The comfort of believing something broken can still be beautiful if you squint hard enough. The fantasy that if you just keep being patient, being quiet, being good, eventually someone will notice you were never the villain they said you were. So now I sit here alone in my apartment with the flicker of streetlights bouncing off my windows, knowing I may never be invited to another family gathering, may never hear from Catherine again. May only ever be a footnote in Emily's next retelling of her life. But at least the silence is honest now. And, for the first time in a long time, I can breathe in it.